Before we start our programming, I'd like to begin with our land acknowledgement. As we gather, we are reminded that Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As a community, we have a responsibility for the stewardship of the land on which we live and work. And today we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabeg peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting. I'm Janine Barnard, and I will be your host tonight. I'm a communication strategist with more than 20 years experience working for clients in a broad range of industries, from higher education to financial service and not-for-profits. I've worked on projects in the energy sector with the Independent Electricity System Operator and the Ontario Energy Board, and I have a keen interest in the energy transition and renewables and in climate communications. I'm also passionate about amplifying the voices of climate experts, advocates, researchers, and others who are working to fight climate change and lower emissions. Before we start, I have a quick note to tell you about two of Enbridge Guelph's upcoming events. Both of these are in person. The first is energy coaching for homeowners. This is at 7 o'clock Wednesday, June 19th at 42 Carden Street, Guelph. And the second is a visit to a 100% renewable energy community in London, Ontario. London's doing it, how about Guelph? And that is Saturday, June 22nd. Registration information for both these events will be out next week. Let's take a quick look at our agenda for this evening's program. We will begin with the context. Evan Ferrari will talk to us about why this is relevant to Guelph, and then move to understanding the opportunities and challenges of the franchise agreement with Gaby Kalapos and Aaron Freeman. And finally, look at Toronto's work on the issue with Councillor Dianne Saxe. From a housekeeping perspective, just quickly, I'd like to point out that we will have an opportunity to take questions following the presentations. So please hold your questions and comments until the end. Our first speaker this evening is Evan Ferrari, Executive Director of Enbridge, and Evan will be providing the Guelph context for this evening's event. Evan?
Thanks, excuse me, and welcome everyone. I'm going to keep this as short as possible so that we can get to the other speakers this evening. The first is that I want to remind you of the fact that we did see some success at City Council back in March, where City Council actually voted to support the Ontario Energy Board decision that was essentially saying that Enbridge, you can't continue to put the burden of new distribution to new developments on the backs of current customers. It was a very positive thing. It did pass City Hall. It wasn't unanimous. There were four members of council that did vote against it, but we were one of 12 organizations, 12 municipalities across the province, and one of the other speakers is going to speak more to this one in a little bit. However, one of the things that happened, and this is coming to the point of why this is a very fine point for Guelph right now, that is on April 5th of 2024, a memo came out of the city of Guelph talking about a $15 million budget cut to the 2025 budget. Of course, that's quite significant. And not only is it significant, it's an amount of about 4.5% of the total budget at the time. Unfortunately, all of those cuts, or at least the memo suggested that they were service investment deferrals, were in almost all of them were in areas anything related to the environment. And you don't have to read all that. I think it's pretty clear that it has a laser focus on environmental issues. The last sentence is problematic, is that it will also mean a delay in reaching council-approved targets, most notably Race to Zero. And Race to Zero is essentially the climate targets for the city of Guelph. Climate change has become an affordability issue, or it is an affordability issue, and we know that it impacts the most vulnerable of our society in many ways. We need the political will to make it happen, from the standpoint that we can't see these cuts to all environmental programs that we're looking at in Guelph currently, and that City Hall needs to hear us loud and clear. So what we're going to suggest to you is that if you haven't already, please let City Council know about the decision, about their decision, rather the decision as based on the use of the strong mayor's power to cut the budget by $15 million. I'll put a link in the chat, so that if you'd like to send a letter to City Council, it's a fairly simple process for you to do so right from that. And on that note, I would like to hand it back over to Janine. Thanks, Janine.
Evan, thank you for the background. I'd like to introduce you to our next two speakers, who will be presenting together to give us all a better understanding of why we're in this situation in Ontario, and to explain what a franchise agreement is. Gaby Kalapos is the Executive Director of the Clean Air Partnership. She's been working to motivate and support local government action on clean air and climate change for over 20 years. Her passion has been on encouraging the uptake, transfer, and implementation of clean air and climate change actions, and the building of partnerships that enable collaboration and support between the community and all levels of government. And joining Gaby is Aaron Freeman, President and founder of Pivot Strategic Consulting. For 3 decades, Aaron has played a leadership role in developing public policy. As the president of Pivot Strategic Consulting, he leads the firm's efforts to move environmental solutions forward through public policy. His clients include companies and associations in various clean energy sectors, Indigenous organizations, and environmental nonprofits. Aaron previously served as senior advisor to the Premier of Ontario. Gaby and Aaron, welcome.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you so much, Evan, for setting that context. I'm just going to share my screen, and I will start the presentation on trying to explain franchising agreements, which are not a fun and exciting thing that often can talk about on this one. So I will do my best on sharing why this is so important. So, as we all know, that there is a fair amount of fossil fuel subsidies all across our different levels of government, and we pay a lot of focus to it at the national level, and there have been commitments at the national level to phase out fossil fuel subsidies. And we've gotten a lot more attention to it, brought a lot more attention brought to fossil fuel subsidies at the provincial level, with the Ontario Energy Board decision in December of 2023 to eliminate the subsidy to Enbridge to have the rate base pay for all the upfront capital costs of bringing infrastructure to new developments. One of the things we've been exploring is that, okay, so that's brought a lot to light to the federal government fossil fuel subsidies. It's brought light to the provincial government fossil fuel subsidies, which we will dig into a little bit more. But it also really clearly outlines exactly how much our status quo energy system, our energy system at present, favors fossil fuel as the go-to for meeting people's energy needs. And this is a really good thing that we're drawing attention to this, because this system favoring fossil fuels has been in place for a long time. And it might have made sense at one point in time when there weren't cost-effective solutions to meeting people's energy needs. But we are no longer in those situations. There are multiple technological and cost-effective solutions to helping people meet their energy needs, and also just pushing in the fossil fuel pipelines into new developments and making the overall rate base pay for it. It doesn't really doesn't really force the hand of developers to explore lower carbon options available to them. So we will kind of speak to that, but we also want to speak to another fossil fuel subsidy that has emerged within the municipal sector, and that is by municipalities being forced to provide free access to Enbridge for use of the right-of-way. And we'll get a little bit more into that later on. I did want to highlight really what the goal that we all have here is to advance an open and objective energy solutions matrix. Let's open up the playing field and identify different technological solutions available to meet people's energy needs. Let's compare and contrast their economics and business case. And let's also look at the change management and systems change that we need to do in order to move and create a more level playing field between fossil fuel and low carbon solutions. This is available to us. And unless we change the system favoring fossil fuel as the solution for meeting energy needs, we aren't going to get the changes happening, in particular in new development. And we know that if we don't achieve it in new development, we're going to have to retrofit these buildings at some future date. So what we're really trying to do is highlight, okay, let's look at all of our energy options. Let's look at the cost effectiveness, both on upfront capital costs as well as operational costs. Let's look at it from a climate lens. Let's look at it from a resilience lens. Let's look at it from a, how does it prepare Ontario for the energy transition coming our way? Which has local job creation opportunities that surpass others? All of these different things are really what we're trying to do about an energy decision matrix. And just as an example, I wanted to kind of apply a back of the envelope energy decision matrix to the expansion of the natural gas fossil fuel system. And I'll take this. This is a back of the envelope calculation. It is taken from a Province of Ontario press release. So this is there was no work on this. This was just straight directly from the press release. They say that phase 2 is going to cost them $234 million, and it results in 8,750 connections. That comes to about $27,000 per connection for the natural gas expansion program. They estimate in the press release that it's to save an estimated between $250 to $1,500 per year overall with all the customers, if all the customers connected up. I should highlight that this was based on a press release that was on natural gas prices before the war in Ukraine, and prices fluctuating and changing. I also wanted to highlight that if you took a payback scenario at $250 a year savings, comes to about 106 years payback. And at $1,500 a year, it comes to a 17-year payback. So that keeps you an idea on this bookends of what the value for money really is. And it highlights that we don't know how many people are saving $1,500, we don't know how many people are saving $250, and we don't know any of the assumptions that went into that analysis. But ultimately what it means is that, does this really seem like a cost-effective solution for reducing people's energy use? Has any other options been considered? Were heat efficiency, geothermal, heat pumps, are any of those kind of considered as part of the solutions to reduce people's energy cost burden? No, we just brought in the pipelines and thought that was a simple solution to a complex problem when it didn't really solve the problem in the first place, and then force the rate base to subsidize that, because we don't know how long it's going to be on the rate base subsidizing it. But this is where an energy decision matrix would be of value in helping to kind of challenge the status quo bias that we tend to have. So the status quo bias I did want to highlight, it really comes down to this. The present state provides an easy access to the fossil fuel infrastructure. The developers say they need their energy, the pipelines come in, and ta-da, their energy work planning is done. We really need to kind of start leveling the playing field in order to reduce the risk of stranded assets and to solve our climate crisis. Really what we need to do is level the playing field, make growth pay for growth. And as such, that works for municipal infrastructure. It should work for utility infrastructure, in particular where we have a lot of risks associated with stranded assets. So that's why the Ontario Energy Board decision was so important. And despite the fact that we lost that battle with Bill 165, there are opportunities to still engage in this discussion, either through the Ontario Energy Board, which is going to be having consultations in the summer. There's also the opportunity for sending a letter to the Auditor General requesting that they do a value for audit money. That's another option, as I've seen a number of organizations and a number of individuals, and even some and political parties. So the Liberals, the NDP, and the Greens did request that on the part of the Auditor General. I did want to highlight the municipalities that have passed resolutions advancing support for the Ontario Energy Board decision, and that we're tracking that, and I'll throw that all in the chat later on. So that's just set us to the context of the provincial fossil fuel subsidies that have been uncovered under the rocks that they've hidden under for many, many, many years. And I'm going to turn it over to Erin to talk about some of the municipal fossil fuels, well, the fossil fuel subsidies forced upon municipalities through the franchise agreements and free access to the right of way. So I'll turn it over to you, Erin.
Thanks so much, Gaby, and also to Evan and Janine for hosting this event. It'll be great. Looking forward to the discussion. So I'm going to talk about a few different areas where we can internalize the costs of fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies that apply specifically to the municipal government level. So the municipal level is important because it's really the municipalities is really where the rubber meets the road on climate change, both in terms of impacts, but also in terms of the costs and the opportunities to mitigate. This includes the areas where municipalities have to deal with those costs include protecting residents and infrastructure from extreme weather, eliminating emissions from corporate assets, from assets owned by the city, and supporting broader reductions within the community. And regardless of the level of government, whatever level of government, federal, provincial, municipal, is setting climate targets, really it often falls to the municipal level to actually deliver on a lot of those targets. And as we know, the main cause of the problem is fossil fuels. So I'll talk about 4 different options for ending fossil fuels at the municipal level. The main one that we'll talk about is around the gas franchise agreement. So this is the agreement that allows gas utilities to operate within the city and to lay pipeline underground in the rights of way that are owned by the city. The second area that we'll touch on briefly is property tax on that pipeline infrastructure. And the third is trying to recover the costs of pipelines. So those are costs that are related to removing the pipelines at the end of life and other costs associated with the existence of that infrastructure underground. And I'll touch very briefly on licensing fees as well, which is more of a sort of an exploration, an area we're exploring. So franchise agreements. So these agreements that have give access to fossil fuel infrastructure underground is not something that's unique to Ontario. What is fairly unique to Ontario is that municipalities are prohibited from charging fees to use those rights of way. So when we go sort of coast to coast in Canada, British Columbia allows them, and those municipalities often charge 3% of the gas revenues, and those are revenues that then go to the municipality that they can use for things like climate mitigation. And essentially municipalities are free to choose whatever level of fee that they want on those on that service, on that right. In Alberta, similarly, municipalities have different arrangements, different levels of fees that can be up to 35% of delivery revenues. So if we take Edmonton as an example, Edmonton charges 32.9% on delivery revenues. That brings in $60 million in revenue to the city, which is equal to about 5.3% of the city's annual operating revenues. Similarly, in Saskatchewan, they can charge an access fee. Regina earns $5.6 million from that access fee. Manitoba charges 2.5 to 5%, which in the case of Winnipeg brings in $22 million. Sorry, go to the next slide. So in order to fix this problem in Ontario, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing would have to remove the regulation that prohibits the charging of these revenues. We would also ask the minister to review the model franchise agreements, so the template agreement that all municipalities have to use, and enable, in order to enable including the payments for using the right of way. We would propose 5% of revenues based on the Edmonton model. And the last thing that we would request is amending the statute that prohibits municipality from charging the costs of removing abandoned pipeline equipment at the end of that equipment's life. The rationale for this is pretty straightforward. We want Ontario to catch up with the rest of Canada. Municipalities are the ones that are exposed to the risk associated with gas infrastructure, and municipalities are at the forefront of delivering on emission reductions programs. Currently, the other aspect of this that we haven't talked about is that the clean energy options, like district energy utilities, are charged access fees for the right-of-way space. So that and other services that use underground rights-of-way are charged, while those who are causing the problem, fossil fuel companies, are not. The last thing I'd mention about the rationale is that the demand for those rights-of-way are increasing as there is less and less space because it's taken up by other services like gas infrastructure. So increasingly, that's going to become more and more of a problem, and it's all the more important that particularly companies that are causing the problem actually pay their fair share. So the second mechanism I'll talk about is pipeline taxes. So the pipelines municipalities can charge pipelines property tax for the amount of space that they're taking up. This typically doesn't raise as much revenue as franchise agreements do in other provinces. To take Ottawa as an example, they collect about $5 million a year from property taxes on that infrastructure. You compare that to what they could be bringing in if they implemented our proposal for using the rights, the charge on the rights of way. I mean, that would be $60 million. Toronto similarly collects $6.8 million in property tax from Enbridge. So it is a mechanism that is currently available, and that may be something that municipality might want to look into. The last thing I would say is about property taxes is you can't charge whatever you want. That's governed by a regulatory regime. So the amount of space, the amount of discretion that a municipality would have around that would be quite limited. So the other cost that's imposed by pipeline infrastructure is a bit difficult to quantify, but there are clearly additional costs to the pipeline infrastructure, in the sense that if you are digging around a pipeline, for example, you may have to dig by hand. You can't dig with machinery. So that's an additional cost to the municipality when they are doing other types of work around that infrastructure. Hard to quantify. This is an area that we're sort of exploring, because we don't know if municipalities are actually calculating this. Some are starting to look into it now. And the other expense around pipelines in the right of way is around removal of the infrastructure at the end of life. So this is a liability that currently the municipality is on the hook for. They do not, gas utilities are not required to post a bond or to otherwise pay for the removal of that infrastructure at the end of life. This is very important because we know in the energy transition over the next 10 and 20 years, a lot of that infrastructure is going to have to be removed, and some of it's going to be very expensive. If you remove that pipeline under a roadway or a railway, for example, the pipeline space has to be filled in to prevent the ground from shifting, which will affect the other infrastructure. So there may be remediation, reclamation work, ongoing monitoring work, and of course, lawyers always get their cut. So there would be legal costs associated with every stage of that. And the last one I won't spend too much time on it. It's around licensing fees. I'll just say right up front, and we had an earlier discussion today with Councillor Saxe about this, who brought this to light as well. The licensing fee it's based on cost recovery, so it only can recover costs that are related to the administration of the licensing regime. So we don't know how much we can extend that, for example, to climate change programs and cleanup costs, and so on. So you would look for fossil fuel infrastructure that is currently licensed or authorized to be licensed by the municipality. And that might include something like a gas station or a car dealership or a ride-hail fleet. So this is something we're sort of looking for more information on, and maybe an area where a municipality can act as well. I think we've got to be upfront and honest about what the implications of removing these fossil fuel subsidies are, which is that, and certainly natural gas companies will probably quite loudly highlight this. The companies will want to pass those costs on to the ratepayers. So it may result in natural gas or gas rates increasing. And I think it's really important to highlight the revenue side of this, what you're doing with the revenues, and to be upfront and honest about where the revenues from this cost recovery is going to go, and targeting that revenue toward energy efficiency program, particularly for vulnerable residents, to help in the energy transition, to help them reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, is one of the most justifiable uses for that revenue, and can sort of politically inoculate the municipality from the accusation that they're raising rates. Can we get the next slide, or is that the last slide? No, that's the last slide. So we'll end it there. Looking forward to the discussion, love to hear the comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Aaron and Gabby. That's really interesting. Our final speaker tonight is Toronto City Councillor Dianne Saxe, and I'll just remind you too that we will have questions after her presentation. Dr. Saxe is one of Canada's most respected environmental and energy lawyers, with decades of experience as a nonpartisan expert and advocate for municipalities, businesses, nonprofits, and individuals.
You don't have to read the whole thing. It's really fine.
All right. Well, how about just the last bit? Councillor Saxe is a climate champion who walks the talk. Welcome, Dianne. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, well, thank you very much. So I did these slides before I saw Aaron's presentation, which has sort of covered a lot of the ground already. And I can't move the slides, so just go ahead and move the slides. There's a couple of things. Yeah, so you heard all this already. Next one. Right. So before I get on to prospective revenue, there are a number of other problems as well that the gas utilities cause with their infrastructure in our roads and public places. One of the ones that I'm dealing with constantly is the interference with our ability to plant trees. So I think everybody knows how essential trees are as climate change intensifies and reducing the urban heat island effect, just giving people shade, providing ways to clean the air, clean the water, give birds a place to go, adding some beauty to our cities. I mean, we need the trees desperately. And one of the things that has been really clear is that street trees die frequently, mostly because they don't have adequate soil volume, and then they get stomped on, and people compact the soil and salt gets put on it. And anyway, they're in constant attack. And so if we want to keep street trees alive, they have to have a much larger soil volume than used to be the case. And what I am constantly finding is I can't get the soil volume. Why can't I get the soil volume? Because of the buried utilities. And in addition, we have now fierce opposition by the utility companies to letting us plant trees, because that makes it more expensive for them if they want to cut things or dig it up or cut into the ground. If the tree is there, it's more expensive and more disruptive. So they are opposing our tree planting. They also, you think about it, they are constantly cutting holes in new pavement. And when they do that, theoretically, they fix it afterwards, but they never fix it back to the way it was before. And again, our experience in Toronto as a cost-saving measure under our previous mayor, we now let the utilities fill in their own holes, and they do an absolutely terrible job of it. And what that means is that the road is now bumpy, even a fairly new road, and you get these utility cuts over and over again, and it makes it really painful, uncomfortable, in some ways dangerous to, for example, ride a bike or a scooter on the street because of the utility cuts and the way that they break down the road. So although we recover some of the financial costs from the utility cuts, we don't recover the degradation of the urban experience, and particularly the degradation of the urban experience for people who are trying to live responsibly and get around without a private vehicle. A third impact that we have is we know we have to move away from fossil fuels, and one of the things, given that we have both a hot summer and a cold winter, doing it purely with heat pumps is really challenging in the comparatively short but very cold periods that we have. So either you're spending a huge amount on electric resistance heating, if you've got air source heat pumps, or you could have ground source heat pumps, which work very well all year round, but for those who need to get into the ground. And that is, again, where the gas utilities pose an immediate and substantial obstacle. And they pose an even greater obstacle to the new concept of network district heating, where because one of the challenges for an existing municipality is, well, how do we get district heating in? We're not building everything all at once. And the buildings, everything already has a building. So the Massachusetts has a well-advanced project that's about to start operating this summer of their first network district heating system, where the idea is to use a schoolyard and a couple of laneways to put in your geothermal to serve a small network of buildings, but then you design it so they can be hooked onto the next one when then there's an opportunity to redevelop the next one. So it's enormously powerful. What is going to be one of the major obstacles? The gas pipelines in the way. So anytime we turn around as we try to get away from so-called natural gas, which is no more natural than arsenic, the gas companies are in the way. And making what was it, $16 billion in profit last year, Enbridge, and a lot of that is from picking the pockets of municipal taxpayers. Now, we've known, when I was environmental commissioner, and we knew that one of the reasons that fossil fuel companies have been so successful is they have been extremely good for 100 years at using their money to buy political influence, using that political influence to have the laws changed in their favor and to give them very large public subsidies, which allow them to make more money and to repeat the process. And that's only been on steroids in the last couple of decades. And it is totally infuriating to constantly come into more and more examples of ways that the fossil fuel companies are getting their profits by not having to pay their way and having somebody else, in this case, municipal taxpayers, pay their way. So it was actually the city of Ottawa that did the first white paper on this, looking at why is it that Alberta, right, the gas and oil province, allows their municipalities to charge the gas companies. And if it was on a straight percentage basis per capita. We're talking about nearly $200 million that the gas companies ought to be paying for the use of our land, and that's not damage to our roads, to our infrastructure, to everything else. That's just like, what would be a fair charge for using our roads? And it's not just the roads either, it's also our parks. So one of the things that the Ontario government does is it gives the utilities, the company, the power to put their stuff on public land wherever they want without our consent. One of the consequences in my ward is that the gas company decided they didn't want to have their switching equipment underground anymore because it was harder to service, and they wanted to put it above ground. So they went into a public park and blocked off the access to the park, took a very high profile corner and put a giant ugly switch there, which the city then had to pay $2 million to move to the other side of the park so the entrance wasn't blocked. So it's they are not good citizens, and it is infuriating that we are being forced to subsidize them to steal our future. So that's what's going on. Next slide, please. So Bill 165 we've talked about already. It is yet another horrible thing that Ford has done to our future. I passed a resolution yesterday at our Infrastructure Environment Committee, which will come to Council in a few weeks, to write to the Auditor General and ask that they investigate this bill, because the bill is forcing ratepayers in existing areas like Toronto to provide these very large subsidies so that pipelines can be built in new areas where they will lock the new people in to gas dependence in ways that are bad for them and bad for us. Bad for the indoor air quality, bad for the health of the kids, doesn't provide air conditioning, isn't the least expensive. So it locks them into a bad system with bad air quality at higher costs for a very long period of time, by virtue of picking the pocket of consumers in Toronto. So I do suggest that you try to get your municipality to at least write it and encourage the Auditor General to review. The Auditor General is one of the legislative officers who can bring down a government. Next, please. So I was asked to say, all right, what are we doing about this? What I would desperately like to do is just get a motion at our next council meeting banning gas in new buildings. It is totally nuts to be putting gas infrastructure in new buildings. Even the International Energy Agency, which was set up to guarantee fossil fuel access for countries like ours, has recognized that if we want even a 50-50 chance of a sort of livable future, by 2025, which is only a few months from now, it is too late to build a new gas-fueled infrastructure, a new boiler, new pipes, new anything anywhere in the world. It is too late. It's a bad idea. And of course, Doug Ford's standing in our way every time we turn around. So I did get staff have been ducking this question for years, and we finally forced them to answer it. What can we do to get gas out of our buildings? And the answer basically was that the province is standing squarely in our way of doing what so many other cities around the world are doing, which is banning new gas hookups, which is absolutely what we should be doing. In order to be able to even get Enbridge to pay for the use of our property and to not leave their pipes there, we have to ask the province again. So we don't have much hope with the current government. The current government constantly does almost nothing that they do is good for the city, and almost nothing that they do is good for climate or a livable future, and almost all of it's bad. But there will be a change of government at some point. In the meantime, the more that municipalities talk about this, and the province is sort of starting to recognize that they've really broken our finances and that infrastructure is falling apart, and they're being more and more blamed for it. So there's some possibility, I suppose, that they will decide they'd rather have Enbridge pay than them, but we'll see. Sorry, back up a step. Let me see if I went through everything else on there. Right, so we have The Toronto Green Standards are going to squeeze gas out of new construction at our current schedule, not till 2028, which makes me crazy because we're going to be approving probably hundreds of thousands of new dwellings between now and then. So those all get built on gas. I mean, it's headbangingly stupid. I'm sure you've all heard the old saw. If you want to get out of a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. Every new gas connection is digging. But the other thing we're moving towards is building emission performance standards to squeeze gas out of existing buildings. This is not going to be an easy win, but again, is something that is spreading around the world and that we are well on the way to adopting. It's good to see other cities. Cambridge, Massachusetts is, I think, in the second year of their regulation, with which requires large commercial and institutional buildings to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by 20% every 5 years. Vancouver, I believe, has just started their own bylaw, again, requiring existing buildings to be cutting their emissions. New York has something. So we're going to be trying really hard to do the same. It's going to be a big fight, I think. But if we don't do it, there is just no hope of our climate targets or of significantly improving air quality. And then again, there's all the health problems that come with having gas burned in buildings. And we know that it greatly increases nitrogen oxides, greatly increases childhood asthma. It's just a terrible thing. So we're doing what we can to move towards it. I wish we could do it faster. I'm pushing as fast as we can. One other thing that we did yesterday, I don't know if this is on the next slide because I forget what's on the next slide. See what's on the next slide? Yes, right. So that's another thing we did yesterday, was to direct our staff to make sure that our pavement degradation fees do cover all short and long-term costs, which includes the one that Aaron pointed out about the cost of hand digging around the pipes, which hadn't been on my original list. And we also need to be thinking about the interference with our ability to grow trees. And finally, we want to work with Clean Air Partnership and AMO and other municipalities to develop a collective municipal approach. Municipalities are stronger together than we are separately. And this is affecting all of us. We are all having our pockets picked. We are all being forced to subsidize what's bad for our future. And if we work together on it, we may be able to do something about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dianne. It's a frustrating situation, and it sounds like a difficult task moving forward. I'm thinking just quickly about some of the recommendations that you and Aaron and Gaby have made, including developing a collective approach, asking that staff look at the utility degradation fees. I think that's something that we can do in Guelph as well, and the letter to the auditor. But before we look at questions from our guests, and I encourage you to put your questions in the chat now. I'll start with a quick question to you, Aaron. You've described this kind of legacy situation that we are in Ontario and in Toronto. Was this the case for other provinces? Has anyone else gone through this before, where they countered these regulations, and have they had successes, or was it not a situation that they had at all?
Sorry, is that specifically around the franchise agreements that you're asking about?
Yes, yeah, you said that there was a regulation, a fee that we.
Yeah, so City of Ottawa, the Mayor of Ottawa back in 2019, the former mayor now, did write to the provincial government requesting that the authority be given to the municipality to charge those fees, and was obviously refused. And going back sort of over 20 years, there was actually litigation around this, where the province actually tightened the rules. I don't have a lot of detail on that. I can dig it up, and you may know, or Dianne, the history on that.
I don't know the history too much, but I'm going to throw in a franchise fees white paper that Edmonton did. So I don't know when that franchise agreement for the present almost 33% is brought in, but I did throw in that on the white paper. So I don't have the years for when that actually occurred. But it was a negotiation that took place between Edmonton, the province, and their utility.
Thank you. Just a question from the chat. Does anyone know what the rationale is that allows old pipelines just to be left in the ground?
It's cheaper for the gas company.
Okay.
And nothing bad happens immediately. It happens later. By that time, the government in power might have changed. So it'll be somebody else's problem.
When you go to build that highway and you've removed the pipe below, it's too late. Yeah.
Well, and for the homeowner too, right? I mean, it's the homeowner's on the hook for much more expensive infrastructure, but a lot of that is down the road. And it's just, it's just shifting. It's moving the money off. It's moving the costs around. But at the end of the day, it's more expensive for the taxpayer. It's more expensive for the homeowner.
Yes. The second question from the chat. You've mentioned that developers contribute to electrical service. Can you say a little more about this?
Yeah, so there's a different structure in play for how electricity infrastructure is costed out versus how fossil fuel infrastructure is costed out. So under fossil fuels infrastructure, it's all under the rate base. Under the electricity infrastructure, when a developer is doing their energy planning and they identify their peak electricity requirements, they submit an energy modeling report with all of their electricity needs for the building to the utility. And the utility then comes back to them and charges them for the electricity allocation that it's providing for them for that development. So there's a charge associated with the actual securing your amount of electricity that you need from the grid. There's also another charge related to infrastructure, should there need to be an infrastructure upgrade resulting from it, which is often the case in new developments because, if you need to put a new transformer, I mean, certainly the wires and all that stuff is an infrastructure cost that's brought in for, that's paid for. But from any infrastructure upgrade that is needed to provide that electricity to that development, the way it's structured on electricity cost is that the utility will charge the developer for that infrastructure investment. They will also require a deposit for that cost, where that deposit is that cost for that electricity infrastructure upgrade goes into an account in escrow for about 5 years. Oh, yeah, that's a story on my hand. It's like, I'll get into that's another funny story. We'll do that afterwards. So what ends up happening is that electricity cost infrastructure, the development puts a deposit in an account that sits in escrow for 5 years. If that electricity use materializes, then the utility says that the electricity use paid for that infrastructure investment. However, if that electricity use does not materialize, then that deposit is distributed between the developer and the utility in some sort of magic formula that I do not have access to. But it's a very complicated structure. And ultimately what it comes down to is that fossil fuel infrastructure is free to the developer and electricity infrastructure is not. What a messed up thing.
Just while we're talking about developers, I'm curious to know, are there any sort of future thinking developers who are concerned about locking in gas equipment as homeowners become more interested in networked services or heat pumps? Like, do we have any sense of pushback from developers?
I mean, there certainly are some, but what they tell me in the end is that they're finding most buyers are very cost sensitive and pay attention only to the upfront costs and not operating costs. Yeah. So people say they will buy clean as long as it doesn't cost them any more, and they won't take a life cycle analysis, which is how it saves them money. So
I mean,
that's what we hear over and over.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Sorry about that. I mean, there's forward-thinking developers, but you got to be really forward-thinking if you're going to take that deal, right? You've got completely free infrastructure that's gas and you got to pay a bunch for infrastructure that's electric. So like it's you know, I think if you're going to create space for forward thinking developers, you got to level that playing field. At the very least, you got to level that playing field.
Yes.
Yeah, I do make a big fuss with any building that comes to me for approval to at least keep gas appliances out. And yeah, anyway, I'm trying for low carbon buildings, pushing as hard as I can, but you know, Ford keeps cutting our ability to do this.
Carol asks,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, sorry.
I was thinking that there is like, certainly we face an issue with the upfront capital cost associated with, there is no there's utility models, but there's no regulated, easy to access utility for low carbon energy solutions, right? But there's one for fossil fuel solutions, for handed to you right on a silver platter, absolutely free. There isn't one that doesn't exist for low carbon utilities. Now there are low carbon utilities coming into the market for geo exchange systems that are really, you know, that are really helping to switch the market. And that type of business model is absolutely critical, because the developers that are doing good on low carbon energy planning for their new developments are often either becoming energy utilities in addition to being real estate developers. They're deciding, okay, we're going to partner with a geo exchange utility. They're going to distribute it and we're going to own the asset collectively. Or they're just handing it over to a utility, a geothermal utility, to do all that work. And there's a 30-year contract on the thing, on the building that is comparable to what they would be paying in fossil fuels. So that it's cost competitive with fossil fuels. And that's particularly important. With the utility model can achieve that. Now it tends to achieve it on higher size buildings, but there's also like some really good numbers. If we looked at what it costs to save us to bring all this fossil fuel infrastructure, and we did some kind of cost analysis of that and maybe allocated it to, you know, electricity infrastructure costs, then that would be a much better system that would lead us towards the energy transition that we need to do, and reduce the risk of stranded assets. Because I think that's the one thing that we're not paying enough attention, certainly the government's not paying enough attention to, is that takes this infrastructure takes 40 to 60 years to pay for. And if we're not going to be burning these fossil fuels for that long, and chances are that new homeowner is going to be on fossil fuels for at least 15 years while their furnace is working. But once their furnace dies, I can assure you, I'm pretty sure, and I put some good money on bets, that they're not going to go for another fossil fuel furnace, and they're going to go for some heat pump of some sort, throwing all of that cost on that infrastructure right onto the rate base. So that's really important for us to kind of talk about this for leveling the playing field. And I think developers are also facing a lot of challenges on the electricity cost and the allocations and the infrastructure. And I think that there's a possibility of really working together so that we can really level the playing field. Right now, we're still dealing with the upfront capital cost barrier, but once that barrier is addressed, and we are kind of, there's business models moving in that direction, the next issue we're going to be facing is the electricity infrastructure. And this is going to be particularly important on existing buildings, more so than new buildings, because you have to bring all the infrastructure in for new buildings. But existing buildings and the unequal playing field for how we cost out infrastructure and electricity infrastructure, that's going to hurt us as we try and decarbonize existing buildings.
Yeah,
Another way I think it's going to really hurt is that you think about who can get off gas. It's going to be the people with money. So who's going to be left trying to pay the cost of the gas system?
Yeah.
Yeah. Vulnerable people in existing buildings. So another question from the team: what is the most effective action then that we can take as constituents? Is that engaging with the province or with the municipality? And what are we asking for exactly?
Can I jump
Well,
in
if
on
you're in a ride,
side? Sorry, go ahead, Diane.
it's fine, Evan.
I just wanted to mention that we did invite all city council to join us tonight, and they had another meeting. However, there are several councillors that are interested in jumping in on the issue, specifically around I think one of the simple things that we can do is to go to council and request that staff begin the research, similarly to what happened to Toronto, and pull all this material together rather than volunteer organizations to have to do that. So I think there's a really good opportunity there. And then Dianne, something that you brought up that I'm afraid is quite embarrassing here in Guelph, and that you brought up green development standards, and we've been bringing this up to City Council, and they've consistently told, and we know this isn't true, but to both City Council and staff about the green development standards, and their claim was that, well, the city can't mandate it. And yet we know that Toronto has had green development standards for almost 20 years. Am I even in the ballpark there? So I think that the concept of green development standards is something that we can do. Most municipalities that are all around Guelph, including Wellington County, are started putting together green development standards. So I think there's an appetite on council with certain members. And given the support that we got around the OEB decision in support of it, I think we've got an opportunity to move things forward on that piece. And then I noticed that further to that question that was up there, there was mention of AMO rather, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and FCM. And I think, Dianne, I'm sure you can add much more value to this, that AMO, do you think AMO can provide some guidance or at least some advocacy on this issue on behalf of all municipalities?
AMO is a lowest common denominator organization, but this is something that does, because you're just talking AMO and not the national system. I think that there is at least a chance, if enough municipalities said, this is a problem for us, this is costing us way too much money, and we need the money to pay for our infrastructure and so on. I think you might be able to get AMO to go. The other thing, of course, is the Climate Caucus. AMO has to be a lowest common denominator organization. The Climate Caucus consists of individual councillors and mayors who are committed to climate action. So it's a good place to start to try to get organized action across municipalities. I do also wonder if it would be helpful for you to try to get a meeting between your Guelph councillors, and I think it's Caledon just adopted their own new green development standards. Toronto has a slightly different statutory framework. So it was true for quite a while that Toronto could do things that other cities can't, but it's no longer true on this topic. But going back to the question that was asked a few minutes ago is where to direct your advocacy? I would say municipalities are much more nimble and much more likely to listen to what you have to say. But if you are in a riding with a conservative MPP, you have a voice that matters and you need to speak up. You need to organize as many of your neighbors as possible. So much of this is the province standing in the way. And the province, the most powerful thing that any MPP can say is, my constituents say. So they need to hear, and they need to hear from a cross section of people. It can't be just the usual suspects. It's got to be people who they think of as their voters, their donors, the groups that they look to for support. And so if you're in a conservative riding, I mean, Ted Arnett is already, one of the more willing to listen people, but if anybody here is in his riding, I mean, he's a good person to be lobbying. Other than that, if your local member is an opposition person, they can say things, which is helpful, but it's hard to do much. I mean, Mike Schreiner is amazing, and he's pushing but he doesn't need to hear from you on this. He already knows this stuff. So if you're looking for ways to use your advocacy, I would say you probably want to focus on your municipal representatives, and especially if what they're now proposing is to cut all environmental stuff. There should be howls of outrage, and if there's enough of that, you may be able to change it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would. I think that's as always wise counsel. I agree. I think the municipal level is probably where you want to focus your efforts. Ultimately, the province has the power, but they'll only do this if they're pushed by municipalities. Municipalities want the power, they need to ask for it. So if municipalities aren't asking for that, and it's got to be more than one of them. I mean, one of the things that we do hear from municipal officials when we talk about this is, what's the point? We can't, if we go alone to the province, they'll just say no. They're right. There has to be a number of different municipalities coming forward in a coordinated way, and that's the work that Gaby's doing to try and coordinate a lot of those efforts. But it's got to happen. They've got to hear from a bunch of municipalities, and they probably will say no on the first pass. So we've got to keep coming back to them, and we've got to keep that momentum building from one municipality to the next to make sure that we don't go away.
Right, and I think that you need it's comparatively easy to get people angry. So if you have a local road that has been cut up by the utility companies and is now really unpleasant and dangerous to travel on, why not have a press conference there and say, this is Enbridge's doing, if it's so, and we're not allowed to charge them to damage our roads, to use our roads. This is so some good stunts to get people angry, to make people understand that this is money being taken out of their pockets, especially, I don't know what the percentage is in Guelph of people who don't have gas at home, but there's going to be some significant number of people who are being forced through their tax dollars to subsidize gas expansion that's bad for everybody. So can you get some of those folks? Is there some appropriately sympathetic group that the press will pay some attention to, where you can say, why are you picking our pocket to allow this $74 billion a year company to take money from the municipality and damage our roads and worsen the climate, and so on and so forth? So some good stuff. Who's got a good dramatic sense?
Proof points and evidence too. Thank you. Those are really, really great responses to that question. I think we've got another slightly more technical question. If a municipality gives a gas line a 20-foot wide path, can the gas company lease the excess space to another company? Or is that just, is that something that just happens in the US? Is anyone familiar with this?
I've never heard of that, and I can't believe they let that happen in the US either. That is so wrong. This is right. Wrong, and that's so wrong.
Well, yeah. I don't think they get leases. They have a right to install their infrastructure, but they don't lease the land. If they lease the land, maybe we could at least charge them rent. So I don't think so. The other thing in I don't know the situation where you are. In Toronto, there's only one gas company. It's Enbridge or it's Enbridge. So there, we don't have that problem. There certainly are situations with above ground infrastructure. If somebody's got a pole and they charge other people to use their pole, I mean, that certainly does happen. And there's CRTC regulates some of that, but I don't think that isn't one of the ones that I have heard of as the problem yet.
Yeah, it's a very particular right of way that they have. They don't have it would have to be something that would fit exactly within that right of way. And I can't actually imagine a service that would exactly match what they would already have. I mean, related to this, the rate base that we keep talking about is all based on infrastructure. A way of looking at Enbridge is it's a company whose entire revenue model is dependent on building more and more infrastructure. They're not in the business of giving up infrastructure. They're in the business of trying to build more and more and more. That's what enables them to go to the OEB and apply for raising rates, apply for more revenue. So it's
sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we had another question about divesting from gas utility investments, and that kind of relates here. Like, how effective is that in the face of the fact that their interest is just in building more infrastructure? Is there any help in doing that?
maybe I don't know who asked the question, but maybe if we can get some clarification here, are you talking about divesting at an individual homeowner
That's
level?
right, on an
Okay,
individual, yeah,
so not like at a new development and into development or any kind of a larger scale.
yeah.
I mean, there's Enbridge is not wild about it because it is cutting back on their infrastructure. They then have to transfer those costs to other ratepayers. But there's nothing they can particularly do about it. I mean, we capped our gas line a while back when we moved to solar and a heat pump, and you know, they certainly made it very cumbersome to do that. But and they anyway, we can go on tangents here, but I mean, they kept coming back to us. Enbridge actually has the right to open a new account for you, even if you've canceled your account, and start charging you again. So we had all these incidents where we had to keep going back to Enbridge to cancel our gas line because they kept reopening it. So like no other utility can do that, right? Can you imagine somebody just like without your permission, just opening an account and starting to charge you a monthly fee? So there's nothing they can particularly, short of that, there's nothing they can really do about the fact that you're basically contracting the amount of infrastructure that they've got, except transferring those costs to somebody else. The costs don't go away; they just get transferred to somebody who's still on the rate base.
Janine, I thought the question was about selling shares. Was the question about selling Enbridge shares, or was the question about cutting off your own gas service?
I think the question was about selling shares, but I mean, both are really good questions. So
sorry.
yes,
Right.
but
Both are
but
good
Erin,
ideas. Both are good ideas.
yeah, exactly.
I mean, certainly of the two, I would think that cutting off your gas service and moving to electric is more effective. It will
Concrete.
get noticed more. It has impact on their earnings, which selling your shares does not. Divestment only works if there is a very large movement to support it. There is quite a large movement internationally about divesting coal, thermal coal. There is nothing that I know of on gas. So anyway, so that's my advice. Get rid of your gas stove if you have one. Get rid of anything gas that you have when you can. Get your house off it if you can. Encourage other people to do the same. All of those are much more helpful, I would think. However, if you own Enbridge shares, you are a shareholder. That gives you the right to go to a meeting. That gives you a right to work with others to propose resolutions. That gives you a right to ask uncomfortable questions. You have some time and energy and you care about the future. Those are good things to do.
Absolutely, yes. Listen, we are at time, and Dianne, Gaby, and Erin, thank you so much for your presentations and the discussion, and in particular, the guidance that you've given us as we are thinking about how we will move forward. It's been really, really wonderful to have you, and we appreciate your time and your help tonight.
No problem. Thank you so much for organizing this and having it. And I did want to let everyone know that we do have a sample resolution that we are putting in, I put in the link. So I'm going to try and put it again just as well. So if I could just, let's see if it's going to copy that.
That's great. Thank you. And you've provided a number of other links too.
Yeah. And there is some, it's not copying it for some reason, but it is in there. So there's a sample resolution that that can be used in any meetings that you're having with municipal councillors for them to use to go in front of council. We want to try and make this as easy as possible for everybody to have this conversation in council.
Let me just say one more thing.
Yes.
I mean, Mike Schreiner is wonderful. You're very lucky to have him. If he does need help, please help him. The Green Party is the only one serious about climate. We need his voice.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Good night. Thank you, Erin, and I guess Gaby and